Hello, my loves, and welcome to another Fluffenhammer adjacent. It's been a while, I know. It's been a busy year thus far. I can tell you, it's been a bit of a one. But getting back into the hobbying side of things, now that there's so much going on. We've got the imminent release of Codex Chaos Space Marines in 10th ed. That's coming very soon, by all accounts, and it's going to be an interesting one. We've seen a little bit of what we're getting. You've got the new Chaos Lord, who is on foot, who is beautiful. With it, he looks very much like they've taken design inspiration from the Slaves to Darkness range in AOS. So there's a bit of cross pollination going on there. He could easily sit in an AOS army as a Chaos Lord with a little bit of tweaking. We've got they've reintroduced Chaos Lords with jump packs. Oh my God, thank you. It's been so long coming. We have wanted our Chaos Lords with jump packs for so long, and it was always silly not including them anyway. Of course, you get Chaos Lords with jump packs. I mean, like Night Lords, Chaos Lords obviously wear jump packs. I mean, obviously they fly. I mean, that's part and parcel of the Night Lord's character. Speaking of the Night Lords, with those and that new kill team, that Night Lords kill team, oh my God, there's going to be such a lot of stuff going on. Those two new um big army boxes. Oh, I want both of them. I want both of them. What are they? I can't remember what they're called. Dread Talon something. The Dread Talon one is like the Night Lords one, effectively. It has raptors and warp talons and a Chaos Lord with a jump pack and possessed and all of that wonderful goodness. And the other one is amazing. I think that's the one I'm going to get first. That's got your Chaos Lord on foot. It's got your Terminators. It's got your Possessed. It's got your Chosen. It's highly elite, that army. And that's the kind of army I like to field, quite frankly. I like small and elite armies. That's why I play Chaos Space Marines primarily. Um, but yeah, it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting. One of the things that's been obsessing me recently, I rediscovered oh my God, this is so old. Does anyone remember the Liber Chaotica? The big volume of books that was published way, way back in the early 2000s by the Black Library. They are effectively a series of volumes, each of which explores one of the chaos powers in the old world, because of course AOS wasn't even a glint in anyone's eye back then. Um, from the perspective of an old world scholar, from the perspective of a Templar in the Church of Sigmar who has been tasked with exploring the nature of chaos. So it's like you get the Liber Chaotica Khorne, the Liber Chaotica Slanesh, Nurgle, and Zeech, and there's also a very small undivided one as well. I found my big collated volume, my hardback book of those from that era, from that time, and I've been working my way through it, and it is absolutely wonderful. I mean, a lot of the material in those books is out of date now. There's been a lot of changes and adaptations with the end of the old world, with the introduction of the mortal realms, AOS, the new situations of the chaos powers. They've evolved a little bit now. Slanesh, in particular, is very, very different from how he was portrayed back then. That said, the core metaphysics is still the same. And the thing these books go into that really fascinates me, they go deep into the psychology of the chaos powers and how they work, how they attract mortals to their worship. Some of them it's relatively obvious. You don't really need a great deal of exploration to understand how, for example, Khorne could snare mortals. It's so easy. For example, the book talks about how it's not just like warrior cultures that that are attracted to Khorne, or which operate in such a manner that Khorne ultimately ends up ensnaring them. It's people like revolutionaries, people who are angry with their lot, with their political positions, with their social positions. It's people who are angry at the status quo and injustice. That's a very, very clear path to ultimately Khornate worship. Serial killers, interestingly, people who kill because they enjoy it. That's another path to Khorne, a slightly lesser known path, a more niche path, but nevertheless, it is one that leads to Khornate worship. Just hatred, racial hatred, species hatred, anything like that can lead to Khorne. But I mean, but as they say, Khorne is one of the more simple ones because everyone experiences anger, everyone experiences rage at some point. It's relatively easy to see how someone could fall to Khornate worship. Slaanesh, again, you don't really need a great deal. Slaanesh is easy. Anything you take pleasure in, anything that gives the slightest amount of comfort or ease or that pleases the senses in any particular way, ultimately leads to Slaanesh. There is the Liber Chaotica Slaanesh is my personal favorite, not just because of my bias towards Slaanesh. Slaanesh is my favorite of the Chaos powers. If I were existed in the old world or in the AOS mortal realms, I would worship Slaanesh. There's no doubt. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. I like Dionysian gods. What can I say? They represent everything that I personally believe in. Things like pleasure for pleasure's sake, beauty for beauty's sake, art, inspiration, openness, the disintegration of historical and traditional prescriptions of things like, for example, gender identity, certain codes of behavior, etc. They represent that, and they are my personal favorite forms of deity in mythology. That said, what I find fascinating in the Liber Chaotica Slaanesh is there is an interview. There is a Slaanesh cultist by the name of the Marquis Dolmanche, which is a reference to the Marquis de Sade. By the way, Dolmanche is a character from Philosophy in the Boudoir, and he more or less is that character, but transplanted into the old world. He's arrested by the witch hunters, and the writer of the Liber Chaotica, Herr Richter, he gets special dispensation to talk with Dalmanche. And those are the most interesting bits of the book, to be honest, because Herr Richter is a Sigmarite priest, so he comes to Dalmanche with a lot of assumptions about what he's going to be like. He pictures someone who's insane, who's deviant, who's mutated, and he's not. He's just not. The Marquis Delmanche is erudite, debonair, eloquent, reasonable. In fact, he's far more well reasoned than Richter is. And that's one of the more interesting things about their conversations. He provides explanations of why he's a Slaanesh worshipper that Richter just has no answer for. Richter has absolutely no answer for. For one thing, Delmanche is very, very aware of what the Chaos powers are and of how the metaphysics of the world works. He even writes an essay in, I believe it's published in the Liber Chaotica Zeech, about how the Chaos powers are coalescences of human emotion and drive and impetus, and he describes Slaanesh as merely the coalescence of those things within humanity that he finds the most laudable. So, inspiration, love, art, poetry, pleasure, all of these things. And he basically states that it doesn't really matter what you do. And this is true in the old world. This is absolutely true. If you take pleasure in it, then Slaanesh already has his talons in you. Slaanesh already has a claim on your soul. And one of the things he says to Richter is, you know, when you sit at your evening prayers and you go through your catechisms to Sigmar, and you feel that surge of spiritual joy and contentment, that's Slaanesh. That is Slaanesh. Slaanesh already has you. He snared you through the practices of your faith. When you take pleasure, when you take joy or fulfillment in even the least of things, not just the extreme things, but even in the least of things, Slaanesh is there. And Richter doesn't have an answer for it. He just becomes very fundamentalist about it and froths and rages and tries to put up like smoke screens of obfuscation because he can't deal with it, because he knows it's true. He knows that it's true. And those sections are wonderful. Dalmanche is so well reasoned that within the old world, you kind of sit there thinking, well, he's right. Why wouldn't you ultimately side with that deity over Sigmar? I mean, Richter says to him, "Oh well, the Chaos powers are so barbaric and so extreme, and they do all of they urge their followers to do all sorts of awful things." And Dolmanche sits there in the cells of the witch hunters and just spreads his hands and says, "What do you think is going on around us? What do you think is happening in the name of Sigmar right now? How many pogroms, how many families are being destroyed? How many people are being tortured and mutilated by these witch hunters? On the merest suspicion that they are in some way deviant, and you call what we do barbaric. At least we take some joy in what we do. At least we spread a little pleasure around, you know? And it's fascinating. I mean, there is nothing Richter can do. He doesn't really have a defense, and he knows it. He knows it. He even goes to see Dalmanche burned at the stake as a heretic. Of course, Dalmanche enjoys it because he's a Slanesh worshipper, and Slanesh worshippers enjoy everything. Um, but Richter expresses regret at the way he treats Dalmanche and the way the witch hunters treat Dalmanche, because he is this erudite, witty, well learned, debonair man. And he believes in his heart of hearts that the culture should treat him better than it does. And that is fascinating. That is really, really fascinating. There's so much in the books about where the chaos powers come from and how they originally coalesced. So you get this very truncated, very abstract version of the fall of the Eldar, or the Eldari, of course, in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, where Slaanesh is born. And he sees it. That's the weird and interesting thing. Richter is visited by visions that he transcribes in these books, and he doesn't know if they're coming from Sigmar or if they're coming from a more demonic source. By the end of the books, it's very clear that it's the latter. But he sees the fall of the Eldar. He sees the coalescence of Slaanesh. He sees Khorne trying to prevent Slaanesh being born, holding on to him for dear life, like wrapped around his putative form, trying to prevent him from coming to be. And while that's happening, Nurgle drifts by and basically says, "You are trying to defy the inevitable. Let go. Let go." Zeech happens by and says change is inevitable. Our sibling will come to be. And of course, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. There's nothing Khorne can do to prevent Slanesh's birth. Um, Arguably the most significant, the one that is the most psychologically deep and interesting, is the Liber Chaotica Nurgle. By that time, Richter has gone, he's basically losing his mind through this exercise. He's having visions of the chaos wastes and of the realms of chaos. He's hearing the voices of demons in his head. He can even see demons wandering around his workspace, like in abstract form, in spiritual form. He's seeing demonettes and plague bearers in spiritual form. When it comes to the Liber Chaotica Nurgle, the exercise itself is tainted. He becomes feverish, he starts to get sick, and he starts to become rambling and mad. He starts to like have fits and fevers where he transcribes these weird Nurgle prayers and poems and things. And when it comes to exploring the psychology of Nurgle worshippers, it goes really deep. Because, of course, as Richter himself points out, the worship of Nurgle would seem anathema to any sane person. Why would you worship a god of suffering? Why would you worship a god who is only going to inflict more suffering upon you? And the thing about Nurgle is, many of his followers, unlike the followers of Slaanesh, are not conscious of the fact. They are people who have been afflicted, who have been treated badly by their societies and by the world at large, who've had misfortune and have sunk into despair. That's how Nurgle gets you, because he is a god of despair. Despite his garrulous and affectionate nature, he is a god of despair. That element of him, the sort of affectionate and ironic aspect, that's exactly what it is. It's a kind of irony. It's a kind of gallows irony. Richter points out that yes, he is affectionate towards his followers, but only within a very narrow purview. He's affectionate in the way that a very abusive parent is. He's only affectionate towards his followers when they fulfill what he requires, what he wants them to be. That's when he's very praiseworthy and affectionate. If they step outside of those bounds, oh, then he becomes wrathful, then he becomes vengeful. Um, but Nurgle, it's not that people actively turn to the worship of Nurgle initially. What happens is they find themselves in dire circumstances. So they find themselves afflicted with disease or disability or plague or misfortune, and they sink deeper and deeper into despair. And the thing about Nurgle's influence is he insidiously and subtly starts to shift the perspectives of those that he has his claws into, to the point whereby they begin to perceive their conditions as somehow truthful, as somehow honourable, as though they are reflections of a truth that no one else will acknowledge. This is the way things are. This is the truth of the world. And eventually, it goes so far that they actually do start to perceive themselves as not only truthful, but beautiful and desirable. So, those who are disfigured by disease, those who are afflicted, those who are in states of absolute misery come to find ironic mirth and even a perverted sense of joy in their conditions. And eventually, their minds are eaten away so profoundly and they're so twisted and transformed that that becomes sincere. After a while, that becomes sincere. So it's not that they're pretending. They actually do find their conditions truthful and beautiful and worthy of being spread, worthy of being promulgated in the way that the Sigmarites promote their faith. And it's really disturbing. It's really disturbing because you see accounts of it happening. And very often, there's no choice involved. Nurgle gets you at your lowest ebb. Nurgle gets you when there is nothing else. He is a god of despair, ultimately. That's his core. He is a lord of despair. But in that despair, there is a kind of ironic joy to be found. And it's really disturbing. It's very complex psychologically and ideologically. And I just love it. I think it's absolutely brilliant. There is a really good account in the book because Richter goes to other organizations. He goes to the priestesses of Shalia, for example. Shalia is one of the old gods of the old world that died, was destroyed at the end of the old world. She is a goddess of healing. She's the opposite of Nurgle. She's the goddess of the poor and of the destitute and of healing and of wellness. And the priestesses of Shalia know very well what Nurgle is. And the priestess that he talks to says, you know what, you lot have a lot to answer for when it comes to the spread of Nurgle's faith and his blessings, because you lot spread despair. Our societies in the Empire are full of disparity, of fear, of depression and degradation, and you lot are responsible for maintaining that status quo. What happens when people grow sick, when they grow debilitated, or when they grow despondent with Sigmar's faith because their crops are failing and they're poor and they don't have enough to feed themselves? They're not like treated with respect. They're not elevated from that position. They're shunned. They're driven out, and that drives more and more people into the arms of Nurgle because Nurgle does care. Nurgle will take them happily. He will embrace them and he will bless them and he will give them the affection they crave. And the priestess of Shalia says this to him point blank. She says, "You are responsible for the spread of Nurgle's creed throughout our lands." And she points at the Sigmarite church and says, "It's you lot. You lot are responsible. The fear of you keeps people in their place. It keeps people buttoned down in their misery. So it's hardly any wonder, is it, that when the chips are down, when there's nothing else, they turn to something else in secret." And it's like, yeah, Richter's got no answer for that. Again, he absolutely has no answer. It's really, really fascinating. I love that. The egalitarian stuff in the Book of Nurgle is really, really interesting. The Book of Zeech is amazing. That one is written largely in ciphers. There's like scribbled ciphers and codes and all sorts all the way through the book, and you need to hold up mirrors, you need to fold the pages in half, or you need to decipher the codes in order to understand what's being said, and that's really interesting. I mean, obviously, once again, Zeech is one of those chaos powers, unlike Slaanesh, where those who serve him often don't know they serve him. They're not aware of the fact because of the nature of Zeech's manipulations and the nature of his creed. Again, anyone who wants to change their conditions, so revolutionaries, people, scholars, wizards, people who want things to be different, they are the ones that Zeech gets. Even the ones who are in the Sigmarite faith who want to usher in some kind of revolution. Very often, in fact, the book points out that very often servants of Zeech don't know that they're servants of Zeech. They are being manipulated under the guise of serving someone else or some other cult. In fact, it points out that one of the things the cults of Zeech in the Empire did was they would set up dummy cults of the other chaos powers or of other gods to operate through, to throw suspicion off of them. It's true in the old world as it's true in the mortal realms. In fact, if you read the Liber Chaotica Zeech, you will find where the disciples of Zeech came from, why that they are so different from all the other chaos forces, why that they are cults that operate within the cities of Sigmar. This is where it comes from. There's a section in the Liber Chaotica Zeech that talks about how, although there are more cults dedicated to Slaanesh throughout the Empire, the most powerful and influential organizations are those dedicated to Zeech, and it describes three of them: the red hand, the purple something I can't remember off the top of my head, and the Cabal. The Cabal is the big one. The Cabal is so big that at some point in the Empire's history, they were inches away from installing their own proxy emperor over the whole thing. They are one of the most powerful cults in the entirety of the Empire, led by Egrim van Horstman, one of the big Chaos special characters from back then, which is why I personally think, as an aside, they should resurrect Horstman in the same way they resurrected Zigfold for the Hedonites of Slaanesh, and make him the big mortal Zeech character in the realms. I'd love to see that. But yeah, these books, man, they are so interesting. If you're interested in the metaphysics of chaos, how it actually works, if you're interested in how the chaos powers get a hold of people and how they are basically ineluctable. Most people, especially Zeech and Nurgle, most people don't even realize that they've already been got. They've already been snared. There's a kind of inevitability to it. You can't escape Zeech's plots. There's not a chance. There is absolutely no way. Almost every living thing in creation is snared by Zeech in some particular way. Even when it seems that his cults and his followers are operating in ways that are self contradictory or self defeating, they're not. Even when it seems that they've been routed and some victory has been gotten for the Sigmarites or for some other power, it's often not the case. It's already been preempted as part of a wider plan. So there's not a great deal you can do. Zeech and Nurgle, they are the ones that are very, very difficult to escape from. Not so much Slaanesh and Khorne. There are steps you can take to escape the influence of Slaanesh and Khorne, but not Zeech and Nurgle. One of them is going to get you at some point. In fact, one of the more interesting points in the Liber Chaotica Zeech, Dalmanche turns up again, but in this instance, he turns up after his burning at the hands of the Sigmarites, and he proclaims that although I consciously served Slaanesh, it turns out he was being manipulated all the time by Zeech, and Zeech has snared his soul and turned him into a kind of pseudo-angelic messenger to guide Richter's further explorations. It's a really cool moment and very sort of like, oh, that's creepy, that's very unpleasant. So there's nothing you can do. There is very little you can do to escape chaos at this point. It's easier in the mortal realms because there are alternatives. There are alternatives in the metaphysics. So there are other gods, for one thing. There's Alariel and there's Sigmar and there's Nagash and all the others. But there aren't in the old world. All of the other gods are just adjuncts to the chaos powers, ultimately. Um, Disturbingly, Shalea is suggested to be just another aspect of Nurgle, one of those weird contradictory aspects of Nurgle. And that's really disturbing, right? There's nothing you can do to escape these powers. So, like I said, if I existed in the old world, or in the realms for that matter, then Slaanesh would probably be the one that I turn to, as horrific as that is. There isn't much choice in the matter, but I would seriously recommend if you can get a hold of these volumes and you're interested in the metaphysics and the background of chaos, go for it because they are amazing.